Doreen 𝗔𝗓𝗢𝗃𝗧 is the
Dr. Doreen is an expert in autism.
Doreen 𝗔𝗓𝗢𝗃𝗧.
Dr. 𝗔𝗕𝗢𝗃𝗃.
Dr. Doreen 𝗔𝗓𝗢𝗃𝗃.
Dr. Doreen 𝗔𝗓𝗢𝗃𝗃 is a visionary in the field of autism. Now you can ask her questions on Ask Dr. Doreen. Our starter question, my child can name over 100 things, and I'm grateful for that progress, but what I really want to know is if he'll ever be able to have conversation with me. How do I make that happen? I feel like there are so many people nodding their heads.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you want to say about that?
Oh my gosh, I'm going to go on for a bit about this.
Okay.
So,
I'll get comfortable.
yes. I mean, yes, so it's a very, very good sign if your child is able to say 100 words or even, 10 words, honestly, because once they start to say words, it's an indication that we can progress in the vocal arena, right? And over time, we've learned a lot about how to help our kids put speech together so that it forms language. And language is always kind of like, has a communicative intent, which is a little bit different than just speech. So I don't know where to start, but I'll just jump in, So in the beginning, and years ago, when we were teaching through ABA, we would, there were a series of language lessons that we teach, and a lot of our kids would, the kids would learn these specific different lessons, and then each child was different in terms of what they had strengths in and what was difficult for them, and then we would go ahead and modify their lessons and help them put all the different contents of speech together. So for example, labels, object labels, which for instance this child has, would be one of the things, right? And then over time we were like, okay, well, another thing we have to teach is actions or verbs, right? So running, jumping, waving, kissing, whatever it might be. And so we would teach that. And also, by the way, keep in mind that the transition, how we developed these lessons would always be that you teach an item receptively first and then expressively, which actually means that I would teach using, let's say, two-dimensional stimulus cards. So like first, if you're doing object labels, it would be like a picture of a child, a picture of a book, a picture of a tree, whatever. And also, I'm not going to go into detail about discrete trial, but there's a lot of technique involved in how you actually teach one target, and you introduce distractors, and then you rotate them, and it becomes a process of teaching the child in rotation with other objects. And gradually, we would have the instruction, though, would be either touch or give me, point to, which therefore then the response of the child would be something that is receptive. So they would like give it to you. There's no vocalization there. And then once they mastered that, you would take that and turn it into an expressive, which is what is it or who is it? And then the child would gradually start to find their words for object labels. So then when you do the same thing for things like actions, then you do the same process also for other types of more descriptive words like adjectives, right? So like now they're called completely different things, but big, small, let's say colors, things that help describe the object, right? And additional types of descriptive words like prepositions, like where an object is it under something else or over, and also pronouns, is it mine or is it yours, or those types of things. So these are already like, I don't know how many, 6 or 7 lessons. And if you you work on like the beginning, and that takes a long time. Like for those of you who are parents, and that our kids take a long time to learn some of these things, and it requires a lot of hours. And I've just now listed maybe 6 or 7 of 400 or 500 lessons. So now let's assume that I've taught a child a bunch of object labels and a bunch of verbs, actions, and now maybe a couple of descriptors. Now my job is to have the child expand their language into, it's no longer just, you don't just say, what is it? And they can say it's a truck, but they have to say it's a red truck, or the red truck, or where is it? The red truck is under the bridge. Or so you start to actually require longer and longer sentences, which you're still just actually expanding their very concrete language, which is they're describing things either in pictures or in vivo, what they see, right? This is still not quite the same as conversational, because conversational requires a lot of additional lessons, which, you know, I'll go back now and say that, so as years progressed, we added a massive number of things that we realized are just as important, maybe even more important in developing conversation. And those are things that we, in ABA language, they refer to them as intraverbals. And so these are things about talking about things when they're not actually physically present. So it's not kind of a concrete response of describing something, but it's more about experiences that we've had. And if you think about conversation, a lot of conversation is about stuff that has happened. It's not really about stuff that's right in front of you. It's not descriptive. Now, fortunately, as we were developing at CARD, we were developing a lot of these types of kind of more abstract lessons. The field of ABA was going through a kind of metamorphosis as well. And the field came back and said, you know, normal language development goes through this process of where a child, a very, very young child, first just requests things. And those are what we call mands. This is true if you think of babies, all they're doing is they're requesting things, right? Like mommy or bottle or juice or outside or whatever it is they want, they're requesting, they're manding. So it became very important for us to make sure that all of our kids are also learning to mand. And that is a very easy thing to teach because it has its own reinforcer built into it, right? So it's kind of like, if you teach your child to request something, they're very motivated because as soon as they request it, they get it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that became like a primary way of teaching, and now, so that became the first thing. The second thing, developmentally, if you think about it, is now your child, imagine the typically developing, let's say, a 3-year-old who's in the back of the car, and they're labeling everything they see. That's called tacting. And so they're going, you know, bus, fire engine, man, whatever they see, tree, etc. And so tacting became super important. Not only was it the second kind of developmentally appropriate language area that we focused on, but it's a very, very important one because it's so hard to not go off on another tangent. But tacting is super important because it assumes that you don't know what's in my head and I'm going to show it to you. And that is a huge part of what we're missing in the development of kids with autism, which is theory of mind, perspective taking. So anyway, the second part of language became tacting. And then from there, you'd go on to intraverbals. And intraverbals are those abstract things. So let's say a child has now learned blue, and they've learned the word sky, but can they, aside from looking up and saying sky is blue, can they describe to you, oh, yesterday the sky was blue, but today it's raining, or whatever it is, right? Can they take that concept and use it in their language? So you then have to get to that point. We developed tons of lessons that would expand on that type of abstract language, right? You have all the concepts, not just the labels. You have the labels, the verbs, the descriptors of all different types, the pronouns, the prepositions, the functions of objects. You know, what do you do with something? The locations, where do you see things? The shapes, like you can describe objects in all different ways. You have all that, but now can you actually start to recall things that occurred so that they are now more, so, and that's a very big one for parents because a lot of times parents want to know what happened in school. What did you do today? So a lot of times we would actually have the child, we would write a kind of a diary and help the child go through and be able to recall a lot of the things that happened in school one by one. First I was in class, then we did, I don't know, math, and then we went out to the playground, and this is what I had for lunch. Then I played with so-and-so, all different concepts. And this is still not conversation, because this is still kind of rote, but it is helping the child expand, right? Because you have to, going from one word to using language to have meaning takes a long, long time. And you have to realize that it's a hard process for our kids, because they're taking all these concepts and in a very compressed period of time trying to make sense of them. So let's say you've now accomplished that, and now we're finally ready to do what we call conversation, which is very easy to teach the beginning, kind of rote part of conversation, which is, hi, how are you? I'm fine, how are you? You know, how was your day? Just those basic social things. But it is super hard to know what to say and what to ask when the topic changes, right? So now we were at a point where we had to teach our kids the difference between a statement and a question, and that brought in a whole bunch of lessons, like what we called statement, question. Like if I say to a child, I had toast for breakfast, he could respond with, oh, what was on your toast, which is a question, or he could respond with, oh, I had cereal. And that's a statement, and it's a similar topic, right? And so we had to do a whole bunch of these lessons so that the child would understand what is an appropriate type of response to any statement or question that someone else would give you. And now we were finally ready to teach all the nuances of conversation, which had to do with, you know, how do I behave? How close do I stand to one other person? How do I behave if I'm if I want to enter a group and have conversation, as opposed to just one other person? What if I know the person versus I don't know them? It's a stranger, an acquaintance, or a best friend, or an adult who is my parent's friend versus my friend. And also the location. How do I converse if I'm in a classroom versus outside? All of these things had to be taught individual lessons. And then it was a matter of getting into deep conversation. So like, okay, so most of our kids talk a lot more about things they like and much less about things they are not interested in. But hey, we had to teach them to be patient and ask questions about things that other people are interested in, and then also know how to appropriately transition to another subject which was of their interest, and then also be able to return to a subject that the group is interested in order to not lose everyone's attention. So just giving you kind of a overview of all the lessons, just want to give you the idea that it's not just about teaching object labels. It's a really good sign when your child can do a bunch of object labels, but there's at least another 50 lessons that have to be individually taught. And remember, each of these lessons has hundreds of what we call operands. So if I'm teaching, let's say, objects, there's at least 100, 200, 1,000 different types of objects I have to teach. Same thing with verbs, same thing with, you know, colors or prepositions or whatever. There's different ones. So it takes a really long time, and once you teach all these things, and you have to do it in the right order so that the child starts to put them together and it starts to make sense. That is why, and I mean, huge, long answer, but that's why we ended up putting together or writing a massive curriculum, which we called Skills, and we spent many, many years listing as many of these as we could and also putting them in order and saying which of the lessons are prerequisites to others, and also, you know, if your child is not progressing, teaching points, how you can make your child do better in a particular lesson, how they can, you know, just prompts and guidance for anyone who wants to work on this. And so it's a longer story, but you can do it. And there's a lot of guidance out there. There's a lot of different curricula. I still think that Skills is the strongest one out there. And I would recommend that you try to get on there. I believe you can still get it licensed online so that you have access to all of these lessons.
And other ABE providers
Have
license
other
it as well.
Oh yeah, some do.
Skills.
Some do, yes.
So I have a dozen follow-up questions, but I want to start with saying that all the things that you just described, if you're wanting to find, like Google and find more information about them, the phrase is verbal operants.
Yes,
That
verbal
you
operants.
can Google that and you'll go, oh, how did I not? Because if you don't know that term,
That's
you don't know
right.
what to look for.
That's right.
I love to listen to you talk about this because it's like,
You remember, huh?
it's like reliving a
Yeah.
really exciting time when my child's language was flourishing.
Yep.
But it also brings up something for me, and I want to know if I'm wrong in this assumption, because I get frustrated when people write in and say, you know, we're doing things, we're doing a little bit of ABA, we're doing speech, we're getting to labels, but how do we get to the other thing? Because I know in their parent heart that's the thing that they want. And people always want to say to me, Shannon, how did you get to where Jem is? Because Jem can hold his own in a conversation. What we did was
So much of
exactly
this,
what,
yeah.
no, that's exactly what we did.
Yeah.
And we had it intensively. So here's this crazy thing for me that people will say to me, well, my child has this and we have this much ABA, and I'll say to them, well, you need to do more. You need to do more ABA because everything that you just described takes more hours. And for me, it's a frustration because when I hear that someone's child is talking and is labeling, then I get excited because I know there are lots of kids that getting to conversation would be a challenge, or even in some cases, not verbal conversation isn't going to be a possibility.
Right, right.
That does exist, but for kids who are labeling and have the facility to speak, then to me it's a lost opportunity.
Oh, absolutely.
And I try to say to people, if you took that child and did this more intensively, I believe with all my heart you would get further.
100%.
Now it takes a whole lot of time.
Yeah.
It's not just doing 40 hours for 1 week.
Right.
It might be, depending on the child's age, doing 20 hours for 3 years or 40 hours for 2 years. I don't know what the thing is, but am I wrong in saying to people it's like money left on the table?
Correct.
Okay.
There's
I
no
wanted to make sure I
question. That
wasn't
is, no,
speaking
you're
wrong.
absolutely right. I mean, if you think about it, anything that you do more intensively, you will master faster, right? And we're not talking about like, 1 or 2 concepts. We're talking about language, which I even in that huge long description that I just gave for half an hour, I did not even get into a whole ton of nuances that also, like, keep in mind, a lot of our kids have attention issues. And meanwhile, you're trying to teach them all these concepts, and you also are dealing with a child who loses their attention. So it's twice as hard. So, it's not enough to do 10 hours. And that's the whole reason for the intensity of ABA. And this is why I get so upset when I see the entire world of ABA changing now, only due to the pressure from payers. That is the single reason. There is no other reason that we would not do intensive ABA. The only reason is that we get a lot of pushback from payers who don't want to pay for 40 hours a week. And I have to say that there's certainly enough topics for a child to learn. This is a very amazing, advanced way of teaching a child one-to-one and teaching them all the subjects and topics that they were not able to learn in their early years. And I will always say that, there's no question. And in fact, there's thousands of articles that shows the more ABA you do with adults, not even with just children, with adults, the more they will learn. If you think about it, it's true of all of us.
But this frustrates me to no end because I am out there and speaking again and meeting professionals, and I am meeting a lot of resistance with professionals. And I recently did a talk and my slide said intensity. When was intensity voted off the island? Science matters. When was intensity voted off the island? Because I feel like the younger people in the community, I'm going to disagree with you slightly. I think that it's driven by the payers, but that they have taken, the other reason why they're not doing it is because it's an inconvenient truth and parents don't want to hear it. To hear that your child needs to have 40 hours of therapy, listen, I didn't want to hear it either.
But I got to tell you, Shannon, before insurance, this is what's really important for me. before we had health insurance. And remember, I started working in this field where there was no funding, right? And so all of the patients that I treated up until we did not have public funding, or we had a very little public funding. We had some school district funding, and we had regional centers, which are DDS, Department of Developmental Services funding, but it was minimal, right? It was only when we got insurance that really things took off. And I will tell you, before insurance, if I told a parent you have to do 40 hours, they did 40 hours, not just 40. They would complain if we did 38.
Right. Oh,
and so so that's what I'm saying. But every parent was like that. And you know, a lot of the kids who have recovered, you know, they're as adults. One of our kids just got married recently.
I know.
So all of these types of things, it was because the parents also were very, very dedicated. Because there was no, it was, you know, when insurance got involved, the lobby for it is very strong. They started having, like, you know, TRICARE put out a bunch of articles saying, hey, intensive ABA doesn't work. You know what I mean? So there's all this other stuff that's going on, which the undercurrent to it is, it's too expensive.
Yeah.
And that's all it is. And once you move away from that, it would be an intensive science right now if it wasn't for the fact that our payers don't want to pay that much.
So would it be too much for me to say to parents that are out there that have kids that are labeling, that want to get to conversation, is it too much to say to me that your child has the facility, if they're labeling things and they have 100 labels, they very likely have the facility to do conversation if you were able to put the time in?
Okay, now here's the issue with that.
Okay.
It depends on their age. And,
Okay,
and there's
that's
two
great.
reasons for that. One is usually brain plasticity, so the ability for the brain, so like, you know, we all, whether it's the brain or the body or the organs or whatever it is, everything is made up of these neurons and dendrites, these cells that are growing the more we learn. This is why when you have, you know, young children and you teach them language before the age of 7, a child can become multilingual with great ease, because whatever they are exposed to, the brain is so highly flexible and plastic that it'll just produce new roots in that area, and it'll just grow, and it'll be like, no problem, I can speak French and German and English and whatever else. But when we get older, as you know, it becomes harder for dendrites to grow. Like, we just don't have the capacity. So that's one reason, is that brain plasticity slows down as we pass age 7. And the second reason is more and more things get in the way that we want to teach our kids. So now you have to become selective. And this is a discussion that I have with a lot of families, even my like very, very, very wealthy families who are able to have 40, 50 hours for their child. The topic now becomes, what are we using this 40 or 50 hours for? Are we actually using it to teach the child language and communication, or do we need to teach them math and science? And sometimes for some people, for some parents, it's more important that the child be able to attend school, for instance, because it appears like now it's just something that's their priority for other reasons. And so now if I'm spending a ton of time teaching the child geography, I'm not teaching them language. That's the thing. As your child gets older, now you have to select. What is your area of focus? Because there's all these other things.
Yes. So what age? It's hard, right? Depends
Well,
on
so
the child.
the ideal situation is, the way I've always looked at it is, you know, you push as soon as you get a diagnosis, right? And sometimes we're lucky and the diagnosis is around 2. Most of the time it's 3 or 4. You get that diagnosis, you start pushing, and you, in my opinion, you hold back school as long as you can, because you need those hours, right? And so now I'm teaching language as much as I can. Social, so like things like eye contact and being able to behave. Just compliance lessons to me are extremely important. So like not hitting when you want something, but asking for it. Those types of things are extremely important. And assuming that I can hold the child back and do 40, 50 hours with them at the age of 3, at the age of 4, 5 even, and I'm now integrating the child into school at 6, and even at 6 I'm doing maybe half days. I am now able to have a child who has basic language, basic social skills, basic compliance down, and yes, they're ready to learn, right? And now I can start to integrate some of the school stuff, and hopefully the child just continues to learn. And I have to say, a lot of times that dream doesn't come true. A lot of times you have other issues. The child might have other illnesses that appear, or other issues like seizures or allergies, or isn't sleeping, or has severe attention problems, or their vision is not receiving stimuli correctly, or whatever it might be, and it slows down that ideal situation. But regardless, for me, if it's my child, my focus for my child is always going to be communication. So both speaking and receiving, so that they can do well in life.
Don't forget, you can watch Ask Dr. Doreen live every Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific time. We hope to see you there.